Historically, I think a lot of utilities would say that, as long as we weren't being talked about, that was a good thing. And we want to kind of change that narrative so that we are talking about the great things that we do with the Bioenergy project and making sure that our water is great tasting and meets all the new EPA regulations. That's something we should celebrate.
Hey listeners, welcome to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. I'm your host, Dan Bagley, and thrilled you're here because today we're diving into a topic that's crucial for our city's future, waste management. As an added bonus, we're recording at the Raleigh Water Treatment Facility, a key site in our city's sustainable waste management efforts. At the sake of being a little cheeky, we're going to get the scoop on poop. So let's dive into all things water and sanitary sewer services. The City of Raleigh's Public Utilities Department, now also known as the Raleigh Water, provides water and sanitary sewer services to about 198,000 metered customers and a service population of about 600,000 people in Raleigh, Garner, Wake Forest, Roseville, Knightdale, Windell, and Zebulon areas. Joining me on this journey is a special guest, someone who's an expert in transforming waste into valuable resources. Ed Buchan, Assistant Director of Raleigh Water. Welcome, Ed.
Hey, nice to be here.
Very excited to have you on board, sir. Now, to start the show, we kind of do this fun little icebreaker where we give you two facts and a false statement, and you have to pick which one is false.
Okay.
So typically, it's kind of a 50-50 if people win or lose. But you know what? I think you're going to do all right.
All right, let's hear it.
All right, here we go. First fact. The Dempsey E Benton Water Treatment Plant, where we're recording from today, treats water from Lake Benson and treats 10 million gallons per day on average. Fact 2. Raleigh Water produces some of the highest quality drinking water in North Carolina and has won Best Tasting Water in the 2022 and 2023 at the NC One Water Conference. And number 3, in addition, Raleigh's water has recently ranked 5th best in the International Taste Testing Competition. Which one is the false statement?
The third one is false.
This third one is false. You're absolutely right. Why? Do you know why it's false?
Because we finished third.
That's it. We finished third.
That's right.
That is pretty. So we have really, really tasty water.
We do. Excellent water. If you've ever been in an area that it may not have great water, certainly areas that in parts of the country where they get a lot of water from the groundwater, and years gone by, the treatment technology really struggled to help with taste and odor compounds. And so you come here and most people are just really impressed with our water quality.
So you're saying water has an odor, or it can have an odor, or how does that work?
Well, so there's different things that can happen. So we did a taste test several years ago during an Imagine a Day Without Water festival. And what we compared it to was well water. And so well water tends to have more minerals in it and a very distinct taste. And so some people who were from usually rural areas, grew up on wells, they actually recognized that, and in some cases even preferred it.
Okay.
But people who are from areas that are usually suburban and urban areas did not care for the well water and were used to what we call city water. And so they do have different taste profiles for sure. And then there's situations that can happen in lakes where algae blooms occur during the warmer months. Okay. And if not properly treated, can create a musty taste. And a lot of that is being addressed through the technology that most water plants have now through ozone and powder activated carbon. But certainly, as someone who grew up around here, these are things that would happen on occasion, so that would really impact the taste of the water.
That's pretty crazy. I didn't know there was so much that kind of came along with water. I just figured came out of the faucet, you drink it, you're good to go. But there's a process put in place. So who by any chance, who are we aiming at? Who is Raleigh trying to take down for 1 and 2?
Well, that's a good question. We think that we're pretty high up there ourselves. In fact, we just entered another international contest this past week. I haven't got the results on that one yet.
Oh,
but
good luck.
Thank you. So I would say Louisville Water. They have really good water, and one of the nice things they've done is They market it. They call it Pure Tap. And a lot of what municipal water providers are trying to do is highlight the value of tap water. Most single-use plastic bottles end up in a landfill, or you see them in a creek. And oftentimes, a lot of the major bottled water manufacturers are just using municipal water. Aquafina, for instance, is manufactured from Raleigh Water.
Okay.
So anyway,
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it's obviously a lot less expensive to get it out of your tap.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sure you guys have run those comparisons, like what a difference between a water bottle and a cup of water would be.
Oh, it's a fraction of a penny for tap water versus $1.50 or something like that for 16-ounce bottle.
And it's the same water that's in bottled water.
Well, I need to be careful here. I think
roughly,
it's they'll run it through usually a RO filter, a reverse osmosis filter. So it does have a very, very neutral taste, but it also strips out a lot of the minerals that people appreciate in their tap water. The famous ones you've probably heard about. I grew up around here, so a lot of my friends were from New York and that area. So I heard a lot about the water in New York, and they talked about the pizza crust and the bagels, and a lot of that
interesting.
is to use the term mineralogy. It's the mineral profile of that water, and New York City makes excellent water. I should say that.
Really?
A lot of people may be surprised about that. They thought it would come out of the Hudson River. It does not. They have a big watershed in the Catskills that they've protected through their watershed protection program. So it's very kind of bucolic in their watershed, not developed. So that usually means you're going to have really good water quality. And in fact, we have a watershed protection program ourselves, and we like to try to emulate the results that New York City has managed to get.
Well, before we jump into that, I want to pull back just a second and let the listeners know a little bit more about what it is that you do, so they know who they're talking to, or whom I'm speaking with. And if you could please just speak to me like I'm, a fourth grader and I'm trying to learn something for the first time.
So for me specifically, I'm an assistant director here, and I manage the water treatment plants and the water distribution system. So you talked about the number of customers we serve and the areas that we provide water and sewer service to. And a lot of times people focus on the water plants. That's where water is made, or treated drinking water. We don't actually make water.
That's a good point.
We treat water, or the wastewater side of things. You're looking at facilities, but there's a whole other element to this where it's underground. This is it's kind of the unseen utility. Power lines, for instance, you see them.
Right.
They're outside, and there's other, there's road infrastructure you see, there's bridges, but most of our infrastructure is underground. So that's the water distribution system. I think of it as the arteries of a city.
Right.
We have 2,700 miles of water lines that we maintain.
Miles.
So that's enough to go from here to LA and a little ways back. And then we have basically the same amount of sewer lines on the other side of the pipe. That's your veins, in a way.
Right.
So in essence, a water utility, to put it in a very simple way, we just move water around. We get it from a source, we treat it, we send it to our customers, we get almost all of it back.
Right.
And then we treat it again, and then we release it back into the environment. So we never are keeping the water, so to speak.
Right.
We're just moving it around. And that's the way to think of a utility in a very simple sense. So I often use the kind of cheeky example of if you consume a cup of coffee, or let's say a adult libation, you're just borrowing it for a little while. You consume it, and it's going to come to us. We'll see it eventually. So that's what a utility does, and we also think that we provide. I was speaking with Congressman Ross a couple weeks ago when she visited our water plant. And we often talk about economic engines and how important they are to an area or to a state. And I said, when you have big industries, whether it's Red Hat, Apple, Citrix, whatever it might be, coming into an area, they might be an engine, but water and wastewater is the fuel.
Yeah,
you got to be able to fuel that engine. So Raleigh alone, I think, is over 120 million. Excuse me, I'm using 1980s numbers. Raleigh alone is $120 billion worth of annual economic activity.
$120 billion.
Correct. And and that's just Raleigh. That's not including our entire service area. And so without water and sewer service, that's not possible. So,
and on top of that, as you said, there's 2,700 miles of lines. I have to imagine that, these lines break, the upkeep. I mean, that's got to be one heck of a process.
It is. And thank you for bringing that up. We have, probably anywhere between 200 and 300 water main breaks a year.
Wow.
And we have a very robust capital improvement program to replace old and poorly conditioned water lines, which are always going to have some number of water main breaks.
Right.
And there's the metric that they tend to look at is the number of breaks per 100 miles. And we have a pretty good ratio there, but you always try to improve that. And one of the things we're looking at now is pressure sensing technology so that we can actually sense a water main break or a significant leak before it starts coming out of the road.
That's fascinating. So you're trying to mitigate it before it even happens.
Right. You can. The other thing about the water lines, we have over 70,000 valves in the streets. If you see the ones that are about 6 inches in diameter, every now and then a cap will kind of pop up. You see it in the road.
Yeah.
Those valves are really used they're like traffic controllers for Raleigh. Those valves are like traffic controllers for the water system. So we can isolate a water main break before it causes significant damage. And oftentimes water lines are under a road and they cause traffic delays and issues there. And one of the challenging pieces to a water main break, because it's all underground, where it comes out from the road may not be actually where the leak is.
Yeah.
It could be 100 feet away.
Okay.
So these new technology can really help you understand exactly where it is and reduce that repair time and use a lot less resources.
Yeah, that's a game changer. So since we're on the topic, every once in a while you see where there's a water main break and you kind of always wonder, okay, what exactly are they doing? So when you have a water main break, someone calls in and says, hey, there's a bunch of water coming out of the street. What are the steps that happen from A to Z to fix that?
That's an outstanding question. I don't think anybody's ever asked before. So kudos to you, Dan.
Well, thank you.
So we get the call and our crews are going to respond. We have water distribution crews that will drop whatever they're doing in terms of regular maintenance and go immediately to that area and ascertain what line has broken and what line is leaking. We have basically the entire water system mapped on a GIS tool that we use. It's not publicly visible,
sure,
but it's very similar to IMAPs. It's basically a layer in IMAPs that we can see. So we can identify where the water line is, its diameter. In theory, the data's not perfect, but getting better every day. The age of it, the material of it.
Right.
So anyway, we arrive on site, figure out what line is leaking, and then that will allow us to identify where the water valves are that are upstream and downstream.
Sure.
So basically what you're going to do is it's kind of like if you have a wound and you want to stop the bleeding, you clamp down on it. You could do a tourniquet. Essentially,
right.
Turning the valves is like a tourniquet.
Okay.
So we'll turn the valves upstream and downstream, and that way the line is what we call isolated. So no more water's coming in, and then once the rest of it leaks out, it's relatively empty.
Okay.
And then at that point, we'll start excavating where we think the main failure is, and sometimes that's a little bit of a
crapshoot, right?
Yeah,
you gotta,
it's a process.
You gotta hunt for it. Okay.
Yeah, you got to hunt for it. Sometimes water lines will run underneath the roadbeds for quite a ways before they come out of the ground. So once we find that, then crews will excavate around it, and they'll either replace usually what we call a stick of pipe, like a length of pipe, and if assuming we have it in stock and the condition of the line, or they can put like a band or a clamp on it.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a Band-Aid, but a really fancy metal one. But there's times when you're having to do this where there's still some pressure on the line.
Okay.
So
I imagine that's kind of dangerous.
It is, and you get wet.
Okay. And
so that's not super fun in January.
Fair enough.
In the middle of the night. So, we obviously have to respond at all times a day. The joke inside of our building is, of course, these things happen at, Friday at 1 o'clock in the morning or something. So
right.
It's never during work hours seemingly, but And we'll also, close a road if we need to. We try to minimize the impacts to traffic, but we also want to keep our guys safe. So
Sure.
Typically the repair, believe it or not, is a relatively quick process. It's the longer piece of it is backfilling it, and if there's pavement involved, repaving it. So that's how it goes. And I would also say that we track all the water main break data, and that feeds into our capital program to help us know where we need to make investments. So if we have a line that seemingly has a high number of failures over a given period of time, that will move it up our list, our priority list. Like, we need to get this one out of the ground and
because it's already had 5 breaks throughout the line. Okay, cool.
so that's why you'll probably see a lot of our capital programs doing work in downtown Raleigh, inside the Beltline, because that's where your older lines tend to be.
Right.
And a lot of it is cast iron, and it can get brittle, especially stuff from the 60s. But we have some World War II era pipes, and I'd even say that, oddly enough, near our office in downtown Raleigh, on Wilmington Street, we have some lines that were, I think, go back to the 1890s.
You got to be joking.
No way. I can't believe it. But the difference here is they are cast iron, but they were way overbuilt. Back then, they thought, if a little metal is good, how about a lot? So
it worked.
Yeah, 100% worked. Back in the 70s, we did an evaluation of the line. The only thing we did with it is they can build up some tuberculation inside of it. We cleared it out, lined it with concrete, and it's still in service today, and it'll probably be in service when you and I are retired, because those things were just really thick gauge pipe. And now, and basically after World War II, things were, and I'm using air quotes here for the listeners, engineered, and those pipes tend to be much more thin, I guess more efficient use of material, but they tend to break more often.
And for point of reference, tuberculation. What is tuberculation?
So usually on a cast iron pipe, they can basically kind of corrode on the inside, and it's not a safety concern. It's just iron buildup.
Just starts to flake.
And as long as there's a good amount of water flow through that, there's little noticeable difference for the customer. Sometimes if water sits in it for a long time, people aren't using water and the lines are oversized, the water can get a brown tint to it. So we're always responding to that if we ever get a call on discolored water.
Okay.
But also, I've even got some pipe in my office that start out, let's say, at a 3-inch diameter pipe, and you can barely see through it now. That's how small the aperture
is. Wow.
Yeah, it's almost like, think of it as same with a sewer line, quite frankly. It's like an artery. Yeah. It gets clogged over time. And so those have to be replaced. And unfortunately, with water and sewer utility, anytime you're doing water and sewer line replacement, it's a challenge because it's underground.
It's underground, and being underground, it means it's not cheap to take out. So I imagine it's quite costly. I mean, if there's 2,700 miles, at some point, all 2,700 miles are going to have to be replaced, right?
I don't know if I've been feeding you questions or not, but that's an excellent point here. But yes, I tell that to our customers when I speak with them, that at some point, all of this is going to have to be replaced.
Okay.
It's like shark teeth. You got to keep going.
Yeah.
And ideally, you replace a line. The rule of thumb is place a line once every 100 years. So you're hoping to get 100 years out of the line. And some of the new materials, we hope to be able to do that. Some of the fiberglass materials and similar materials of that nature that, in theory, they shouldn't corrode. It's more, I think, more of a challenge on the sewer side.
Okay.
Where sewer gas can really eat up concrete pipe and even iron pipe. It'll just dissolve it.
Really?
In real short order. Yes, sir. And one of the weird things about Raleigh is that in 2007, back when I started, our average water demand was 52 million gallons a day.
Okay.
In the year 2024, it is just above 52 million gallons a day on average. It's starting to go up just a little bit.
Okay.
But if you think about the fact that we generally add 10 to maybe 12,000 new residents a year to our service area, that's stunning in terms of controlling demand. But what that has done, here's the weird thing about it, is that has increased the potency or the concentration of our wastewater. It's very highly acidic. And so areas that were not problematic in years past, all of a sudden have a high dose of hydrogen sulfide gas. And that just...
Because there's so many more people.
Correct.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. And my first thought is you're trying to think about the future. You're trying to think about all the new people that are still moving here and all the other cities that you're also helping. All this water's coming from Lake Benson, correct?
So we have two water sources here in Raleigh right now. Our main water source is Falls Lake.
Okay.
And that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers in the early 80s. And prior to that, we actually withdrew water from the river itself. That was before they built a dam called Falls Lake, and it was just the Neuse River. But even before that, so this, I think we established an intake on the Neuse River in 1967. Prior to that, and if you go all the way back, we used to get water from Lake Raleigh and Lake Johnson, which is now a park. So that's Walnut Creek.
So what happens when the drain is too much on the water source?
So right now we're in a good position because we also recently brought Benson and Wheeler, which we kind of treat as one water source, back online in 2010. This is where we're at now. The Dempsey Benton Water Treatment Plant takes water out of Benson, which was built in the mid-50s along with Lake Wheeler. And Raleigh did get water from those two lakes from the mid-50s, probably going into the mid-80s. When by that point we had Falls Lake online. I think the leadership at that time felt like that was plenty of water. And then here we are today.
Right.
and we've got a lot of people moving here. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the country, and we project that to be the case. So right now we feel like we can manage our water demand through 2040, somewhere between 2040 and 2050 with our existing resources. But we're looking at a lot of new things to help augment our water supplies, which, for the record, when you're talking about water resources and bringing a new one online, you got to think decades in advance. You can't think,
right,
hey, I'm going to need this 2 years from now. You got to think of, I need this 15 years from now. And so right now we're evaluating potentially building a new reservoir in the Little River Watershed, which remains protected. It's in eastern Wake County. And that's been something we talked about since the 90s.
Right.
And so, but you remember when I talked about our water demand has been pretty flat since 2007. What that has done is pushed off the need to have a new resource online, which, it saves a lot of money. I look at it kind of like a car. If you're like me, you drive a car until
it dies,
until the wheels fall off. So what you're doing is you're deferring that expense for a new water supply as long as you can. And that's the beauty of water conservation. Now, it kind of hurts you on the front end with less revenue, but it provides a big benefit in not having to bring a new resource online. So, and another idea that we're looking at is having a water intake on the Neuse River just upstream of our wastewater plant discharge.
Okay.
So you're just essentially taking water out of the Neuse. But remember, we're returning almost all the water back to the Neuse. So
you're not pulling, everything out. It's coming back.
Right.
So
in theory, it's like a shell game. If we take out 30 million gallons, we'll be putting 30 million gallons back. And actually sometimes more because sewer systems leak. They call it I&I, or infiltration and inflow. So during a rainstorm, water can sneak into the sewer system. We don't want it there, but it gets in there. And then so that what that does is it increases the amount of sewer coming into the plant. And therefore, we might need 52 million gallons of water a day, but we're putting 53 back into the Neuse River. So it looks like we're creating water, but we're not.
Gotcha.
But anyway, so those are the two options we're looking at. But we're also evaluating here at Dempsey Benton, can we bring treated wastewater, otherwise known as reuse water, which we have a reuse water system in Raleigh right now. We have a tank on Sunnybrook Road. We provide reuse water to NC State's physical plant, and I believe Carolina Country Club. They're using it for non-potable uses, boiler blowdown water, that sort of thing, irrigation. But can we also take that water, bring it to a water treatment plant, blend it with the raw water at I think it's 80% raw water, which is the water from Lake Benson,
Okay.
and 20% treated wastewater. So you're essentially recycling your wastewater
Right.
For drinking water. And a lot of times people have a sort of an ick
Feeling
response to
about
that, but the reality is everybody's downstream of somebody. So that's already happening.
That's a good point.
For instance, Johnson County, during dry conditions, basically half the water coming out of their water plant is coming out of our wastewater plant.
Well, we'll jump back into this in just a second, but before we take a quick break, you did say the Little River waterbed, it's protected. Who protects it?
So that area was acquired, I guess, by proxy by Wake County on Raleigh's behalf. As if you remember, I was talking about the Catskills and how New York City has protected their watershed. The idea with any water supply watershed is that you want to minimize development.
Right.
The less development, generally speaking, the better water quality you're going to have and less work you're going to have to do at the plant. So it's protected through zoning ordinances in Wake County. Little or I don't think any of it is in Raleigh's jurisdiction. So we're relying on Wake County and other neighboring municipalities to limit that development through development ordinances. So that's how it's protected. It's also home to, I believe, 4 endangered species and 2 threatened. So it's a high quality water that we want to protect for a lot of reasons.
Not just for human consumption.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Ed. And we will be right back with the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. My guest is Ed Buchan, the Assistant Director of Raleigh Water. Ed, how you holding up?
Hanging in there. Ready to get some more questions.
All right. So here's the deal. The name of the show is the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast, and we would love to know if you could share a big idea from Raleigh Water related to sustainable waste management that you're excited about right now.
So, Dan, I think our most notable effort along these lines would be what we call the Bioenergy Recovery Project, which has the, I guess, unfortunate acronym of BURP.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. It's memorable, though.
It is.
And so think about this. I mentioned earlier about the amount of waste that we're receiving. So you generate a lot of what we call biosolids, which is a nice way of saying the dried byproduct of wastewater. and it becomes a management issue because you're getting significant volumes of it. So how do you manage it? We do have around 1,200 acres of agricultural land around our plant that we have land applied some of these biosolids in the past, but ultimately the volume that we're seeing, especially over time, is so significant we needed to think of a new way to manage this amount of waste. So that led us to the BURP. And
that is a great term.
The nice thing about this, so right now we're using anaerobic digestion. So what you're doing now currently is ejecting air into the waste treatment process to encourage microbes to do the waste reduction and waste treatment for you. So you're using a biological process there to reduce that waste and to kind of treat it. So what we're going to be doing is switching from an aerobic system to an anaerobic system. And the benefit of this is you think of an anaerobic system as essentially giant pressure cookers, Instapots. But
so we're not putting like poo on a treadmill.
No,
we're sorry.
No, I gotta give me a second after that one. Just thinking of the images there. So we are basically building, and we're largely completed with our project where we're going to have large pressure cookers. So we're using pressure to reduce that waste, and the result of that will be a 50% reduction in biosolids.
That's impressive.
Which is a huge volume reduction. And right now we're also using a third-party vendor to haul a lot of these biosolids away to either landfills or some other ag site. And so that means big dump trucks, diesel trucks on the road, and a lot of them hauling biosolids. So with a 50% reduction, that's a lot less trucks on the road. So there's a big greenhouse gas improvement there for us. And then on top of that, we'll be able to capture biogas, which is a byproduct of this process, treat it on site, and then feed it into a gas transmission line that Dominion has on our property. Typically, a fun little fact, utilities don't always play in the sandbox nice together. Usually we're arguing about easements and access to each other's areas. But when the gas company wanted to put a line through our wastewater facility, we were like, absolutely, let's do this.
Right.
So it provided us the opportunity to inject that treated renewable natural gas right there into their line, and they're going to give us credit for that.
Oh,
and
great.
that credit will apply to filling up our CNG buses the city has.
Very cool. So we are providing energy to the energy department.
Correct. So we will be able to hopefully provide fuel for up to 50 to 70 buses per day.
Wow.
So that's a big, these are the CNG buses, but that's a big, another greenhouse initiative that we're happy about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, that's a wonderful, sustainable idea that is a win-win for everybody.
It is. It is, the triple bottom line, where everybody's winning there. And I think it's amazing when you think the fact that my parents, who grew up in Raleigh in the 40s and 50s, when they flushed the toilet or took a shower or whatever, that went straight to Crabtree Creek.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are today with within a really short period of time. I mean, water treatment's been around, for over 100 years, but the wastewater side of things is still a fairly new technology, and we're already at a point where we're going to be able to make natural gas, reduce our biosolids, and the wastewater that comes out of our plants is really close to drinking water quality. So that's how far we've come.
That's amazing.
In a pretty short period of time.
That's amazing. And so is the bioenergy recovery system, is it built yet? Is it coming? What's the status?
We're actually finishing it up now. We hope to have it fully online this November. And there's parts of it that we're basically testing out, make sure it's going to work the way we want it to. But we're in the short rows now, as the farmers would say.
Yeah, love it.
And we're getting close to being able to have people out there to see it and show how it works and really start to make a lot of renewable natural gas.
That's great. Well, I'd like to, for our next question, I have a couple special guests that recorded a message that I'd like to play for you now.
Okay.
All right, Ed, here is our first special question.
Can you tell me what happens when I flush?
That's the age-old question, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Whether you're a child or an adult.
Where does that goldfish go?
So that's a really good question. What happens is most of our, when you flush the toilet, water pushes it down through your service line. There's a pipe that leaves your house that goes to the public sewer that's usually in the street. If you notice, there will usually be a manhole in front of your house or somewhere nearby.
Okay.
Underneath that manhole is where the sewer line is. So there's a line that connects your house to that public sewer line. It's called a service line. And sometimes you'll see a little piece of PVC 4-inch diameter pipe poking out of the ground.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it gets run over by a lawnmower on occasion.
Yeah.
That's your sewer clean out. So if your service line ever gets blocked, someone will have to use that to clean out your service line. But so when you flush it, it will go down that service line into our public line, and that's usually going to be gravity. So it's the grade of your service line has to be a certain percentage, so it'll actually flow downhill.
Makes sense.
And then
Newton's law.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If it was up to us, all sewer would be gravity because it's free, and
Good point.
it always works. There's never a power outage with gravity, and unless you're in space. Anyway, so it'll use gravity to flow into the public system. Then it will also usually use gravity to continue to flow it ultimately to our wastewater plant. But oftentimes what happens around here, because if you've looked around Raleigh, it's pretty hilly. So it's just impractical to have a gravity flow sewer system everywhere.
Right.
So it'll gravity flow usually to what we call a pump station or a lift station. I've heard of some kids call them poop elevators. So it collects in these wells that are underground, and then a pump will pump it up to a new elevation to use gravity again. And so we have about 130 of these throughout our service area.
Okay.
And they all have backup power. So, and that's true of the water plants and the wastewater plants. So if there ever is a powder out, like a storm or something like that, the water and wastewater systems will continue to work.
I'm trying to imagine what these elevators look like.
Oh,
And
well, That's a good question, Dan. And one of them, some of your listeners may be familiar with the smell on occasion.
Right.
If you're on the inner belt line near, I think, the Highway 64 interchange, there is one of our main lift stations right almost below the highway.
Okay.
And there's now a big flyaway ramp nearby, and we weren't terribly excited that the road was going to go there because that's the exhaust area of our lift station. But
right.
we've invested a lot of money on odor control there, so that shouldn't be a problem anymore. But what I was going to tell you is that poop elevator is an Archimedes screw. I think there's 4 of them. They can move 25 million gallons a day if needed. And so they're basically a giant screw that just lifts water from a lower elevation, which is, it's probably 50 feet deep there at that wet well, up to a new elevation.
That's amazing.
It is. That's a fairly new one. Big investment from our utility to upgrade that plant. It was really the screw part of it. They call it the flights. The old screws had really deteriorated because of that sewer gas. It's really corrosive. And so we had to get new screws. I think they had to be shipped in from a European country. It's where they make them. So it was really a neat project. But so that's a big scale one. There's smaller ones that they use vertical turbine pumps that just kind of suck it up and do suction to put it into a new elevation. But we do that, and then eventually it will get to our wastewater plant.
So you weren't lying. That was actually a pretty many steps from once you flush to once it gets to the treatment center.
Yep, and most people don't think about it. They think they flush and it's gone, and it's going to go through a lot of processes to get there. I will take this opportunity to mention that you said something about a goldfish, and that's probably not the end of the world for us. But what we don't want to have in the sewer system are wipes, no matter how they're labeled.
Yes.
And grease. Most people aren't going to be flushing grease, but grease down the sink, something like that, will still go to the sewer system. So anytime we can avoid any type of foreign material, basically it's just for human waste and toilet paper, and that's it.
And the reason being, I'm assuming because it will clog the pipes or the veins, as we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely, it is. We now know about certain types of food and cholesterol that can cause serious circulation problems and in humans. And similarly with the sewer system, if you have grease and wipes, they tend to work together. Sometimes also roots can kind of sneak in at the joints of sewer pipes.
Yeah.
And they catch grease and they catch wipes. And the next thing you know, sewage is coming out of manholes, and technically it could even back up into a house. So we also spend a lot of time cleaning sewers.
Yeah.
We have about 17 or 18 very expensive flush trucks that go around all the time, every day, cleaning out sewer lines. And a lot of times that's areas that they're repeat offenders, so to speak. It's always grease built up and stuff like that.
And so when you're cleaning these out, is it like high pressured water they use to clean it, or do they use I'm imagining like this drill bit, if you will, that goes down the line and back up or something?
Yeah, no, we this is not as fun as I was hoping because you know all the answers here. That's exactly what we use. It's a drill bit. They call it a pig. I'm not sure. I guess it's a pigtail. It's coiled like a pigtail.
Okay.
And you can just kind of drill through, whatever detritus has built up on the side of the pipe, and then you'll use a high pressure line to clear it all out into the downstream manhole and suck it out there. We also use robots to inspect pipes.
Hold on.
Yeah.
You use robots.
Yep, we do.
All right. I'm interested. I'm leaning in. Tell me about the poo robots.
These are robots you don't want to have over for dinner, though. I have to be clear about that.
Fair enough.
But they are tracked robotic cameras, and not nearly as cool as the ones they have on Mars and things like that. But they have little treads on them, like little tanks, and you put them in a sewer line. Now they have to be relatively small diameter, but they're heavy. They're real heavy, probably 70 pounds, something like that.
Okay,
and they're pretty robust. So they have different types of lights on them, and they have a camera, and you put them down a sewer line. So you're looking for defects. So sometimes sewer lines can sag. Sometimes there's root intrusion or buildup of grease. So you're assessing that constantly, And that also feeds into our capital program. Like if this line, you can rotate the camera up, and if the roof of let's say a concrete sewer line is really deteriorated, I mean, you can see the ground. So that will tell you like, okay, this pipe needs to get replaced.
Gotcha.
ASAP. So the robots are really cool, and we take them to schools and things, but we don't let anybody handle them for obvious reasons.
Right. Well, thanks for answering that question. We have one more from a young individual, and I'm going to play that one for you now as well.
Is the rain from the sky the water that I drink?
So to repeat for you, is the rain that comes from the sky the water that he drinks?
In effect, yes. Now, of course, it's being treated before he's drinking it. I mean, theoretically, you could catch it on your roof, I guess, and try to drink that. I wouldn't. Even rain, we now know, can have contaminants in it, just atmospheric deposition of different things. So we still feel like it's always important to drink treated water.
Right.
And so what happens is, in Raleigh's case, is let's say it rains around northern Durham County, that water will fall in the Falls Lake watershed. And a watershed is just basically a big water catching bowl. So if it falls anywhere in the Falls Lake watershed, it's a bowl, it'll drain towards the middle of the bowl, which is Falls Lake. So it'll drain out of Durham and into Falls Lake through different streams and creeks. And then eventually that water will get to our intake where we withdraw it. And we have access to about 58% of the water in Falls Lake for drinking water purposes. So we'll take it out of Falls Lake, and then we'll send it to our water treatment plant and go through the treatment process, which largely is, historically that's been focused on removing viruses and other similar bacteria and pathogens of that nature. But it's a lot more complex now. Historically, it used to be just throw some chlorine on it, maybe run it through a trickle filter and call it good. So now what we do is we'll run it through a flock sed basin, or our flocculation basin, and you'll settle out the suspended solid that's in the water. If you ever look at Falls Lake, and if you're in Cary, let's say Jordan Lake, that water is not crystal clear.
Okay.
Same with Lake Benson, where we're at right now. That water is usually going to be a greenish brown, and so that's just organic material that's suspended in the water, and you have to add some chemicals to get those particles to stick together and sink down to the bottom. So then the water column at the top becomes very clear. Then we'll use ozone, which helps destroy those taste and odor compounds I mentioned earlier that algae can produce.
That's a product, I'm assuming?
It's a technology. Ozone is, I think, 3 oxygen atoms connected together, and it's a highly...
So we're talking about oxygen that's above the planet Earth.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, you can actually theoretically smell it after lightning strikes.
Crazy.
I often say we have little Zeus tubes here at the water plant. It's the god of lightning throwing bolts into the water. And what it does is it's a powerful oxidant. So it breaks down those organic compounds. So
that's really cool.
Present any problem. And that's a relatively new technology in water. And then we'll run it through a filter. And these are like, let's say a layer cake. A water filter has usually anthracite, which is kind of like a carbon material at the very top, and then sand, a layer of sand, and a layer of different size stones.
Okay.
So
it's being filtered through all of that.
Yes. And you really think about it as increasing the surface area for treatment process. You want a lot of surface area for that to work properly. And we just replaced the filter media at our North E.M. Johnson plant recently. So those are all fresh. That only happens every 10 to 15 years. So that was a big deal for us. So after that, we'll use some disinfection products like, we'll combine chlorine and ammonia to create chloramines, which is a very powerful disinfectant that stays in the distribution system for a long time. And the beauty of it is it doesn't produce disinfection byproducts, which usually chlorine only can produce. And then we'll add some fluoride. We're a system that does fluoridate the water to improve tooth decay issues. So that's water treatment plant in a nutshell. And so,
I'm glad you brought up the chlorine, because it seems like once a year in the city of Raleigh, you have like a week period, or maybe it's just a few days, where the water tastes a little more chlorine-y. Is that a thing?
Yeah, and I've for years been wanting to direct all the calls to Dan, to you.
Thanks.
So yes, that is 100% true. And all systems, Cary and Durham and Raleigh, all use chloramine. So that's the combination of chlorine and ammonia. All systems that use chloramines, usually once a year, and we try to time it that we're all doing it roughly the same month, which is March, we will stop using ammonia. So you'll just have chlorine-only disinfection. So it's kind of like one old school. And the reason why we do that is to kind of reset the microbial environment inside a water distribution system. Think of it a little bit like how certain bacteria, I guess, can become resistant to antibiotics. Switching back to chlorine only is like throwing them a disinfection curveball. So they can't get used to one, and then you kind of reset it with chlorine. Chlorine is still a very effective disinfectant, and in fact, some systems still use it. I want to say Charlotte, because their water quality is different than ours, they're still using chlorine only. So, but by and large, a lot of systems have switched over to chloramines. But the one downside to that really is usually once a year you will switch back to chlorine only, and then there's a detectable taste and odor with it. And the beauty of chloramines is it's odorless, it's neutral, and so people like that. They get used to it, and in a weird way, we think of it as we'd almost be upset or concerned if people did notice the difference.
That's a good point. But it's completely safe.
It is safe, yes.
So that one time a year in March, when you taste the chlorine, don't call Ed. It's normal.
Yeah,
it's safe. And it'll go away soon.
It tastes like safety. That's the way I say it.
Tastes like safety. I like that. We're going to run with that. Well, we will be right back with more information from Ed Buchan on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Ed, I got to know, my father, he has filters everywhere. He's got the Brita filter. He's got the filter for the refrigerator. He's got a filter underneath his sink. Is that necessary? Is it overkill? Do we need to have filters?
So that's another good question, Dan. And I always start off by saying we feel confident that the water coming out of our plant that's in our distribution system fully complies with all state and EPA requirements for the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we feel that our water without any filter is still very safe. That said, we know that filters can, to some people, improve taste, especially if you live in an older house. Your service line might also be as old as the house. and so you might feel like a filter could provide some benefit there. And also, if there are, when you think about the Safe Drinking Water Act, the term that you'll often hear is MCL, or maximum contaminant level. So we always stay under that maximum contaminant level.
Okay.
But that also means that there's still some level of any contaminant in the water. In fact, the EPA is very clear about that. So if you're concerned about that, certainly a water filter can help with that. The state of North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality, on their website, they have a list of filters. You can just search that.
Oh, that's cool.
And kind of make sure you're getting one that's effective. And the other thing that I always mention is that if you do have like a cartridge filter or any type of filter, I suppose you should always replace the filter media according to the manufacturer's direction. I know I've been guilty of it myself in the past, where you leave that one in the refrigerator for
a year longer than you should.
Right. And then it's probably doing more harm than good at that point. So as long as you're doing that, I think it can provide some benefit. But our goal is of course, to make that water safe coming out of the tap.
So really what I'm hearing is I was right, he was wrong, and you don't have to have a filter.
Yeah, I don't want to get between you and your dad, but...
Wonderful. Well, I want to steer the discussion a little bit different direction real quick. And I'd love to know how much work goes into managing Raleigh Water. How many facilities are there? How many employees does it take to make this place rock?
So I guess from a treatment plant perspective, we have 3 wastewater treatment plants.
3, okay.
We call them resource recovery facilities.
I like that.
Yep. And we want to focus on that resource recovery element of that. And we have 2 water plants. Of course, we're in one right now. That's the Dempsey Benton plant. And then we have one in North Raleigh called the E.M. Johnson plant. So those are our main treatment facilities. We have other warehouse facilities located throughout our service area, just so that we have places to store equipment when we need it. Because we're covering practically 2/3 of Wake County. So
Right.
if we have a water main break in Zebulon, we need to have materials and equipment close by. So we have those scattered throughout the service area. And we also just opened up a brand new water quality lab in Wake Forest, right off of Capitol Boulevard, as it goes into Wake Forest. And so we're really happy about that, because prior to that, the water quality lab was from 1967 vintage, which I love that decade. I love that era.
Right.
But we needed a new water quality lab. So that's just been completed. So we're hoping to have some people come out there and see that. So that covers most of our infrastructure, other than the 26,000 fire hydrants and 70,000 water valves and 130 pump stations, all of those things that are part of the distribution and sewer collection system. And we have, I think, 27 elevated storage tanks.
Wow.
So those are usually going to be at the higher elevations in a given area. And I think we have 9 different pressure zones.
Okay.
So pressure zones are areas that are based on the elevation of the top of a water tank. So we can basically know exactly what the water pressure should be in a given location. And really, geography dictates where those water towers are. But generally speaking, if you look around, you'll see those tanks at the higher elevations points. We want to make sure we have enough pressure to serve our customers. So
that makes sense.
In terms of staff, I'm not sure the exact number. I want to say it's close to 700 people in our department. And of course, this is a 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365.
That's another good point. I didn't think about that.
Operation.
There is no sleeping. You are 100% going all the time, and you have to split that among 700 people for waste and for water.
Yep. At a water plant, there'll always be 2 operators at least here. No matter what time of day, what time of night, Christmas Day, they'll be here. And then you'll have people on call that are having to respond to sewer overflow or water main break or some other issue all the time. And so it's when you get up in the middle of the night to go get a drink of water, there's a reason why that works.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And you gotta have people here all the time. It's like Waffle House. We never close.
Well, it reminds me of just kind of the unsung heroes of the city. Things we take for granted. If I get up at 2 a.m. to get a drink of water, the water's on.
Yeah, thank you again for recognizing that. It's a lot of work and a lot of pride goes into making sure, it's kind of like the silent service. You never hear about it.
Right.
In some ways, I think we're sort of like an offensive lineman. You never hear about them until they get a holding penalty.
That's it.
But without them, you're not going to win the Super Bowl.
Right.
And
100%.
So, we don't get a lot of attention. And historically, I think a lot of utilities would say that, as long as we weren't being talked about, that was a good thing. And we want to kind of change that narrative so that we are talking about the great things that we do with the Bioenergy project and making sure that our water is great tasting and meets all the new EPA regulations. That's something we should celebrate.
Well, fortunately, this podcast is going to do just that. And we want to make sure that we get this out to everyone so they can know just how awesome the work everyone here does. So I want to say thank you to all 700-ish employees working in Raleigh Water. And this leads me to my last question. Believe it or not, the time has come. What's something we haven't asked you that you'd love the people of Raleigh to know about?
So I think when you think about water and wastewater systems, in many ways, they're relatively simple and age-old infrastructure and concepts, in terms of, we're just moving water around, essentially, is what we're doing. And so water treatment 100 years ago, in many ways, is very similar to what we're doing today. Mm-hmm. We have some fancier tools, and we can make a really great product now with maybe even poorer water quality. But one thing that has changed, even during my career, is a big focus on cybersecurity for utilities.
Oh, sure.
The Department of Homeland Security recently announced that there is very serious, incredible threats to the cyber infrastructure of utilities from foreign parties. And so we have invested a lot of time and effort in making sure we're as cyber secure as we can be, because we tend to think of things as we need to make sure we do a lot of resiliency planning and tabletop exercises, and typically that's a hurricane,
Right.
A big snowstorm, or something
Fire.
to that, a natural calamity. But what is now different, and one we recently did a tabletop exercise with a lot of other city departments, is what if there's a way to interfere with the water distribution system,
Right.
and being able to move water to our customers? How do we react to that? And thankfully, right now, a lot of our system, because of really smart people, can still be manually operated. But there's still a lot of cyber security issues that we have to think about. We use a lot of remote technology to manipulate refilling up water tanks.
Okay.
So theoretically, you could run a plant from your
Anywhere.
couch. Yeah. Now we'd always still have people here, but it does speak to the reliance on technology to, like those pressure systems that I was talking about earlier, how you
Right.
can sense different things. There's a lot of cool things that we're doing. And in fact, I'll go off on a little more of a tangent, but we're also evaluating the use of smart meters for water meters. We're replacing a lot of our older meters with what we call smart meters.
Okay.
Everything's smart these days, I guess. But
Right.
the nice thing about smart meters is that eventually we will probably move to a new metering technology that'll be basically real time. Right now, we'll have a staff person go out to a meter. They can read it remotely to get the usage data, but the customer can't see that, and it's not real time. So
Okay.
hopefully that's something in the future that we'll be able
So
to
this
change.
is something the customer will be able to see as well. So transparency, if you will.
Yeah, ideally that this will be a public-facing
That's cool.
portal that they could use to understand their water use and that sort of thing. So that's a neat thing that's coming.
So I can really tell my daughter she has been using 50 minutes of hot water.
I have a 14-year-old, so I'm crying with you, my friend.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Ed, I want to thank you so much for all this knowledge. I learned a great deal today, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan, for having me.
And thank you for listening to or watching this podcast. Give us a follow, the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast, on any podcast app or on YouTube. We've got more great episodes coming your way as we dive deep into the heartbeat of your Oak City. And hey, if you have ideas for our podcast, let us know. Visit our podcast page and learn how you can share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear from you. A special shout out to the production team behind the podcast, Earfluence, a Raleigh-based podcast production company. Learn more at earfluence.com. This podcast was brought to you by the City of Raleigh's Office of Strategy and Innovation, also known as the Office of Yes and the City of Raleigh's Communication Department. I'm Dan Bagley, and we'll see you next time on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast.